guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 12 of our ukulele build. Well, my parts came in, and they came in a little earlier than expected, and that's great because now we can move on. So we now have the pieces for the nut at the top of the fretboard and the saddle, which will be installed in the bridge. So what we need to do to start off this week's show is we're going to glue the nut at the top of the fretboard. Well, here we have the nut, and this little piece back here is the saddle that will go into the bridge. Now, these pieces here, I ended up ordering them, and they're already, they come pre-formed with the grooves already cut. I may have to make some adjustments to the height, but other than that, these ones are already fabricated for this particular size of instrument. Now you can make your own, and that's not what this particular video is about, but that's up to you. You can make it out of bone, you can make it out of plastic, whatever you like. But what we've done is I've come along now with a chisel, and I cleaned up, there was a tiny bit of squeeze out in here, and I've taken a sharp chisel and cleaned it up really well, because you need this nut to sit extremely flush here at the end of your fretboard. And what we're going to use to install this is a little bit of CA glue. Don't overdo it because you don't want any squeeze out. But we're going to put a little dab of CA glue there, and we're going to seat this in place centered on our fretboard and hold it for 20 seconds until the glue sets up. You can use a little bit of accelerator if you like, but I'm just going to do it au natural, if you will, and glue that nut at the top of the fretboard. And there we go. There is our nut glued in, and we're just gonna let that finish setting up. I'm pretty sure it's on there solidly. It's nice and centered. And for our specific purposes of this instrument, what we're looking for is at the 12th fret, we want the strings to be, well, 2 millimeters for my metric buddies, but you're looking at about 5/64 or 3/32 above the 12th fret. So that's going to determine how high our saddle is in our bridge. And that's going to be our next thing, is to route the groove to accept our saddle into our bridge block that we made last week. Well, the saddle is a standard. It's a standard thickness, and in this instance for the ukulele, for a soprano ukulele, the thickness is 3/32 of an inch. So what we need to do is we need to route a groove in our bridge that will accept this saddle. Now the depth of that routing is going to depend on your ukulele. Every ukulele has variances, and like I said before, you need to get the proper height of the string above the 12th fret. So for that, you have to take some measurements here. I really can't give you that particular measurement for the depth that you need to route here. So I've set up a makeshift kind of a setup over at the router table, and what we're going to do is we're going to head over there and route this groove to accept this saddle. Now you want it to be as tight and as flat bottom as you can make it. The saddle will not be glued in. Years down the road you may need to replace it, and the last thing that you want to do is have to replace the whole bridge. You just want to be able to pull this out and put in another standard sized saddle piece. So you want it as tight and as flat on the bottom as you can to get as much of the surface of this saddle touching so that the vibrations of the strings can resonate down into the body. So now with that being said, let's head over to the router table. Well, we're over here at the router table, and what I've done is I have set up a makeshift auxiliary table here so that I get the maximum support of my bridge while I'm routing. I've also installed an auxiliary fence, and that is for pretty much the same reason. In the collet of the router, I've installed this 1/16 of an inch straight bit, and for my particular ukulele I need to route a groove in the bridge that will be 5/32 of an inch deep, and that will be routed on this side of our bridge in the top of it. Now you can see here I've done a 1/8 of an inch roundover all the way around on my bridge just to make it a little more aesthetically pleasing. Now of course a 1/16 inch bit, this might even be smaller now that I think about it, is not big enough to house our saddle, but it is the only one I have that does not go over the measurements. So what I'm going to have to do is take a bite on it and then move the fence a little, take another little nibble, and I'll just keep working my way up to get the required width of the groove here that I need in my bridge. And of course I've also set this fence, I'm not sure if I already set it, but it'll be 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of our bridge. So let's go ahead and route this groove and hope that I don't screw it up. And there it is. After, I think it was 3 or 4 passes, we have the saddle installed in our bridge. Now I'd just like to point out here that I ended up having to take a small file and just clean up the groove a little bit. Even though I was taking tiny passes, it still left grooves and made it so that the saddle didn't sit nice and flush on the base of that bridge. So make sure you got a nice connection between the saddle and the bridge. And for those who are confused at this point, the saddle is the white part, the bridge is our piece of walnut. Well, now that we've got that done, we're getting to the bare nitty-gritty in the end of this puppy. Let's take this over to the bench and get this bridge installed on our instrument. One thing I meant to mention is about that auxiliary table that provided the extra support. I put that on the table because it's such a small piece to work with. You want as much support on it as you can get. But for those of you who are wondering how I attached it or held it in place, a couple squares of double-sided tape held it beautifully to the top of the router table. So a little bit of double-sided tape, and for the back auxiliary fence, I just used some quick grips to attach that to the regular fence of the router table. So there you go. There's how all that was attached. So now let's head over to the bench and get this bridge attached. So the glue for the nut is dry, and now it's time to glue our bridge to the body of the instrument. If you remember correctly, we're working on a 14-inch scale. And what that means is the measurement from the inside of the nut right here to where the strings contact the saddle on the bridge here is 14 inches. So we need to get the 12th fret at exactly half that distance, which is 7 inches. So from the 12th fret to where the strings contact our saddle should be 7 inches in length. In order to assist us with this, what I've done is taken some fine string and I've tied them into the bridge with a little knot underneath just to hold them in place as if they were going to be the ukulele strings. And I've weighed it down this end with just a setup block. It's nothing fancy. So we're just going to let the setup block sit there, and that's going to give us the tension on our strings so that we can line the strings up in the center of our fretboard. What happens sometimes if you're new to this, your body can be a little bit misshapen, and if you mount your bridge square to your body, you won't necessarily have your strings centered. So what you're going to need to do is put on these makeshift strings on the outside of the nut, and then that'll give you your side-to-side adjustment of your bridge. From there, measure 7 inches from your 12th fret to your bridge and glue this in place. Clamp it down well and let it fully set up. So after mucking around with it and having issue after issue trying to get proper alignment, what I've done is I've made kind of a setup block or a stop block, and it's just a piece of 1-inch poplar that will rest on the edge of the 12th fret here, and as well it will rest on the edge of the bridge right up against the saddle, and that's just going to give me my distance. This is not 7 inches. This piece of wood is actually less because it's an inside to inside measurement between the 12th fret and the saddle, but the measurement between where the strings contact that saddle and the top of the 12th fret is exactly 7 inches. So just a little aid to help me glue this bridge in place. The bridge is glued in. The waiting game of letting the glue dry is over. The next step that we need to undertake, of course, is to mount the tuning pegs onto the neck. We've already drilled the holes for those tuning pegs to come up through, but now we need to work at the back of the headstock in order to get those tuning pegs screwed into their place. Now we're only going to do this temporarily, just to get the strings mounted and finish the build. This will all have to be removed later on after we test the instrument in order to put the finish on. But in order to complete the build, we're going to go ahead and install our tuning pegs. So let's head over to the bench and check that out. Well, we've got the ukulele lying on its face, and I've got the bench separated here so that the bridge can lie in that gap and it can sit flat. Don't put too much clamping pressure onto the body of this ukulele. You have to remember, it is an instrument and it is thinner stock. But now what we need to do is get our tuning pegs mounted onto our instrument. And for that, it's quite a simple process, really. And all we're going to do is sit the tuning pegs in through our holes that we have already drilled. We're going to take a straight edge and line it up along the straight edge of our backer plate, and once we get that lined up and straight on there, and they're both parallel to each other, once we're happy with that, we're just going to hold them in place and mark our mounting holes for our screws. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of those marked up, and then I'll come back and see you. All those holes are marked, and what I'd like to do now is I'd like to put all of these tuning pegs back in, line up those marks with the mounting holes, and just hold them there in place just to make sure they look right from the back. Just because they lined up with a straight edge doesn't mean they're going to look right on the headstock of the instrument. Well, I've got them in place there, and I'm pretty happy with the placement, and they look right to me. So at this point in time now, I'm going to go ahead and center punch these holes and then take them over to the drill press and drill a pilot hole for the mounting screws. I will caution you to make sure that you're using a depth stop when drilling these holes and double checking it before you drill. It would be disastrous now to accidentally drill right through your headstock and have it so that you have this ugly hole on the outside. That's the last thing we'd want. So check and double check, use a depth stop, and go ahead and drill the pilot holes for the mounting of these tuning pegs. Well, the pilot holes are all drilled. We've got 2 out of the 4 tuning pegs screwed in. So I'm just going to go ahead and mount the other 2. And we're really coming along here, guys. This is the end of the build pretty much. So go ahead and mount your tuning pegs, and then we'll see you right after that. And now the tuning pegs are mounted. Check that out. That's awesome. Look at this thing. This is definitely a very cool project. But we're missing something. And what we're missing, of course, is the strings. And that's what we're going to do next. Let's go ahead and install the strings. And I'm going to walk you through that process with this particular type of bridge that we've built for this instrument. But as far as the build itself goes, boys, we're done. This is it. This is your ukulele. And I'll just show you the headstock there with the tuning pegs. Very professional looking. The fretboard looks great. The body looks great. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. But this is it for the build. So let's go ahead and get some strings on this. Well, at this point in time now, it's time to string our ukulele. And this here is facing the correct way for me, but let me turn it around so that you can see it this way. And the way it's going to work is string 1 down here is going to be the A, string 2 is the E, string 3 is the C, and then the G string will be up at the top here in position 4. So strings 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, you need to tie a knot into these strings, and the knot is kind of a figure 8. And I already tried to film it so that you could see it on the camera, but it just doesn't want to zoom in on something that small. So I'm going to show you on this piece of rope. And basically what you want to do is you want to bring the string around. You can see I went in behind there. Then bring this over top. Can you see that there? So you've got this figure 8. This loop went under. This loop goes over, and then it comes up through. And you can see a figure 8 knot there. And you pull that tight, and that will cinch in there and prevent it from coming out of our bridge. So let me just show you that one more time to try to make it a little more clear. So this is your string, and you bring a loop down, crossing it over. You bring the next loop underneath, just like that, and then the next one can go down through that hole, creating this figure 8 configuration, just like that. And that's going to cinch up nice and tight on there and make it so that the strings won't pull through. So what you want to do, and in this case here we're doing string position number 1, or the A string, is you want to feed the string in. Remember those holes that we drilled? Feed it in through this direction, tie your figure 8 knot, and then pull it up through like that, so that your knot will go inside underneath your bridge, and the knot will prevent it from coming through at this slot for the bridge. Well, once you get that done, the string neatly tucks underneath the bridge here. You want to bring it up over the saddle, up to the nut, and it will go into the groove for the nut, and then just pull it a little tight, not super tight, but a little tight. Wrap your string around your tuning peg several times, and then finish it off by going through the hole in the tuning peg. And then once you get it through that hole, then you can of course turn the peg in order to tighten your string. Now of course these strings are nylon, and they will continually stretch for quite some time before you can get it to stay in tune. So you're going to have to be continually tuning these strings, and that's the drawback of the nylon string. You can already hear how it's slipping out of tune. That's from the string stretching and that knot pulling tight under the bridge. So just keep working on it, get all your strings put on and tune them up, and then come back and see me. You know, I guess in all fairness, if you're a beginner to stringed instruments, I should probably point out the position of the next string, the E string here, and that would be directly above the one that you just fit in. Let me just see if I can show you here as I pull this one through and snap it in place there. This one here will be on your neck up at this top tuning peg. The next string that goes on will be up at this top tuning peg, and then your last string over here in position 4 is going to be on this guy right here. Sorry about that. I sometimes forget that some people may not know that information. Well, not really having any experience with the ukulele, of course I'm going to use an electronic tuner to try to get this thing in tune. So the first string of G, or sorry, the fourth string, which is the highest on the ukulele, we will tune that to G. The next one will be to a C, right there, and the next string will be the E string. This thing has been finicky for a while due to the fact that these strings are really stretching out. So it's going to take you some time to get your instrument in tune and to have it stay in tune. But sounds great. It's got a lot of volume to it. That mahogany really gives it a nice sound. The strings, I didn't cut back on the expense of the strings. I got ones that were a little more expensive just to put some nicer strings on it. Guys, you gotta love this. And there you have it. 12 long weeks in the making, but definitely worth the wait. Guys, if you followed along and made your own uke, you should be happy as a pig in slop right now, because this thing is fantastic. What I'm going to end up doing is taking the strings off of this and applying the finish. And for that, we're going to carry on with a French polish from making our own varnish, or sorry, shellac, mixing it up to applying it, filling the grain, the whole 9 yards. We're going to finish this thing up right, guys. But for now, this is the end of the build. So I don't know if I'm going to carry on next week with the finish, or maybe I might take a couple weeks off and post a couple other projects for those that weren't really interested in this particular project. Guys, if you didn't try this, you're really missing out. So many techniques here that we touched on, wood bending, tool fabricating, jigs and fixtures, unbelievable, the multifaceted aspect of this build, and I really hope you followed along with me, because if you did, you learned a lot, and I know I did, and I'm thinking on making a second, except maybe make it electric. I think that could be kind of cool. So Guys, I want to thank you for tuning in. It's been a long 12 weeks. I hope you were here for the whole ride. And I'm going to see you again next week with yet another, not about the ukulele, woodworking video. Just in case some of you are wondering, kind of on an end note to this whole build video, how much did this thing cost to make? And I figured it out, and bottom line is it wasn't that expensive. The most expensive thing here was the tuning pegs and the strings. And it's because I went a little higher grade on the strings, and the tuning pegs I went with a different style. But all in all, I'm at about $41.85 Canadian. So the board itself, I used about $10 in lumber, all in all, with this particular instrument. And the parts were taxes in $31.55. And like I said, the most expensive thing being the strings, that was $10, as was the tuning pegs. The fret wires and the nut and the saddle really are dirt cheap. So all in all, just over $40. And if you guys think that's a lot of money, where else can you get 12 weeks worth of entertainment and a high quality handmade custom instrument for $41? Next to impossible. Guys, get out there and make yourself one of these. You're gonna love it. See you next week. Okay, lots of requests to hear me play this thing. So, I'm no George Formby, but here we go. La, la,